Hi, I'm Faith Knutsen. I'm the Director of Social Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the Voinovich School of Leadership and Public Affairs. And this is a mini series about grant writing. I have a fair amount of experience in grant writing, both for my father's business long ago in Appalachian, Ohio, and also for the last 10 years with the Voinovich School of Leadership and Public Affairs, where I've won multiple grants to help small enterprises in our Appalachian region. I'm looking forward to talking a little bit in each module about specific aspects of grant writing that might help in these particularly troubled social and economic times. We'll be talking about local funders and ways that local for-profits and nonprofits can fit what the funders want and get a little bit of funding for their own goals. The fit between funders and those seeking grants. Grants can be obtained at the federal level, the state level, the local level, and sometimes from individuals. A lot of people, when they start thinking about grants, think about the federal level. All federal grants are required to be showed on grants.gov, which I'm showing here. This is the website where all these grants are listed, and it's easy enough to put in a keyword and see what kind of grant opportunities might come up. For example, if you are in the field of education, you have a small nonprofit, and you're thinking about getting grants in education, you might put in education and look at the opportunities. Federal grants are extremely competitive, and for particularly small institutions, it's unlikely that you would be able to get a federal grant right off the bat. However, you might potentially be able to be a sub-awardee to some other larger entity. More likely, if you are a small grant recipient or if you are seeking funding for the first time, local foundations might be the place to go. The Sugarbush Foundation is a particularly strong local foundation that's run by the Flournoy family, now by the second generation thereof, and is run through Ohio University's foundation. They have a wide variety of opportunities for awards, and if you click, as you can with any of these funders, on the application parameters, you get an idea of what the deadlines are and what the project requirements might be. Other local foundations in the Southeast Ohio region include the Athens County Foundation. And as with many funders these days, the current pandemic emergency response is something where a great deal of funding is going. Just like with the Sugarbush Foundation, there are guidelines and ways to see what kind of funds might be available for your kind of enterprise. Another local foundation is the Foundation for Appalachian Ohio. Again, they also have funding for emergency response, and they have certain pillars in the case of this enterprise in which they fund specific kinds of awardees. We've talked about the possibility of federal funding, which is quite competitive, and local funding, for which there are numerous foundations that might fund your particular enterprise. Another level of funding is the state level. If you are, for example, in the performing arts or arts education, and I am on the board of multiple enterprises that get funding from this particular entity, the Ohio Arts Council provides a significant number of grants. Like all grantees, it does have a portion of the website that talks specifically about the grants, and in this case, it has guidelines and grant writing tips that will be particularly helpful, particularly if you are a first-time seeker of funding. I strongly recommend that no matter what funder you're going after, either make a phone call or look at their website or both and try to figure out what it is that they fund most frequently. During my longer grant writing session, one of the exercises that we do is that I ask people to get into teams and search for the funder that might most readily fund the idea that they have. And what I suggest is that you think through what it is that you want, find a funder that might be most appropriate, Browse their website and list at least 5 things that you found out about their mission, their funding, the way they make grants, or a variety of other things that might help you decide whether this is the right fit for you as a grant seeker. This kind of initial opportunity assessment gives you the opportunity to look at the due dates for the grant. Is the due date far enough in the future that you'll have an opportunity to write a competitive grant? The size of the grant request. Are you seeking, for example, $10,000, but this funder only gives $500? Or the other way around, are you seeking $10,000, but this funder has a minimum of $10 million? There will be certain ranges of grant opportunities that are most appropriate for your ask. You also, of course, want to know what it is that the funder usually funds. Look at the lists of all of the grantors that the funder has had recently to see if you are similar to those. You want to look at the nature of the proposal that has to be written. How long is it? What kind of background is it? What kind of requirements are there? And finally, the characteristics of a probable awardee. Are you the kind of enterprise that they usually fund? Are you the kind of idea that they're very interested in? When you meet someone who's a successful grant writer, who has had wins and losses in their past and is particularly well funded right now, you might be tempted to ask them why they won a grant. However, I think that the best question is actually, why did they lose? When they lost, why did they lose? This helps you think about all of the ways that you can avoid that kind of situation yourself. Often people misunderstand the funder's mission. Maybe they're in education and the funder is focusing on the performing arts. Maybe they are in the performing arts and the funder is focusing on basic needs. Sometimes, if you're seeking a grant, you're just not similar enough to what they usually fund. Even if you're in the same sector, maybe they have particular kinds of enterprises that they fund. They fund ones that are newer, they fund ones that are more edgy. Whatever it is, it's very important to look at the former winners. Sometimes, however, you may be too much like what they usually fund, particularly in a time that we are in of significant change socially and economically. It might be important to look at the newest guidelines that the funders are seeking. Another reason is that you may have come back and asked for too much money. If you go to the same funder time after time again, they will very frequently be asking you to write a sustainability plan, and quite possibly, you really just have to prove that you are sustainable. Or overall, and this is the most important thing to recognize, maybe you just weren't as good as the other competitors. Grant winning is a very competitive process. And even though when your grant leaves your office, you think it's the best thing that's ever been written, the truth of the matter is that all of the other applicants think exactly the same thing. And when the reader is looking over all of these applications, it may be that yours was very good, but it may be that yours wasn't as good as the 5 others that did win. So, what can you do to improve your chances? Be very careful to understand the funder's mission. Be very, very careful to look at what they've funded before and what their current guidelines might be. Consider whether you've gotten funding from this funder before. And keep in mind that this is a competitive process and you may just not make it this time. Thanks for joining me in this first module on our mini-series on grant writing, and I look forward to joining you again in the next.